Hey guys, tonight we slip into the strangely soothing world of Byzantine bureaucracy, the true insomniac's paradise. Imagine soft torchlight flickering down endless marble hallways, the faint rustle of parchment, and the gentle, rhythmic scratching of quills echoing through vast, echoing chambers. You're in Constantinople now, somewhere around the 10th century, and you're about to follow the thrilling, nap-inducing saga of one humble man's attempt to get a building permit. You won't survive this, not because it's dangerous, but because it's boring in a way so complete, so thorough, so exquisitely uneventful that your brain might simply drift off. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are Dorotheos, a modest merchant who just wants to add a small portico to the front of your home near the Bronze Gate. Not a full renovation, not a 3-story expansion, just a portico, something to shield customers from the rain as they browse your embroidered tunics and imported cedar oils. And so, on a pale Thursday morning, clouds thick and unhurried above the Bosphorus, you do what any honest citizen would. You approach the imperial office of permits and proclamations. You've got your formal parchment in hand. You've even brushed crumbs from your tunic. Inside, the building smells like beeswax, cold stone, and a decade's worth of unfiled grievances. A sleepy clerk with a voice like dry bread takes your name, your property coordinates, listed as just south of where the cat with no ear usually sits, and your detailed drawing of the proposed portico. You hand over your carefully inked diagram, an elegant sketch of 2 columns and a tiled awning, and watch it vanish into a wicker tray marked Pending, Moderate Priority. That seems reasonable. You're told, in a tone of polite indifference, that you will be contacted shortly. Naturally, you are never contacted shortly. The tray, woven from local reeds, slightly unraveling on one edge, is in fact a trap, a liminal space. Once a scroll enters, it exists not in time, but in concept. The clerk, whose name you learn is Spiridon, assures you that it's in progress, which you suspect is code for, I don't remember what you're talking about. Spiridon wears the same woolen sash every day, and it always smells faintly of pickled turnip. Weeks pass, you visit the office again. The tray is fuller now, almost comically so, with parchment cascading like a bureaucratic waterfall. Spiridon is on break. A younger clerk, new, eager, with a feather behind his ear, tries to help, but accidentally drops an entire stack into a brazier being used for winter warmth. You watch the fire eat at someone's appeal for a well-digging permit and feel oddly comforted that you are not alone. Your own request is somewhere in that sea of ink and parchment, but no one is exactly sure where. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine chancery had a functioning filing system in the modern sense, or whether it was more of a vague understanding that everything is somewhere, probably under something else. The reality was likely a mix. There were procedures, technically, protocols, chains of authorization. But enforcing them required energy. And by the 10th century, energy was something reserved for religious festivals and elaborate moustaches. Now back to your scroll. It hasn't even reached the first approval stage yet because it hasn't been reviewed for grammar. Yes, grammar. You're told that a scribe in the lower wing is tasked with ensuring all petitions use the correct subjunctive clauses and observe imperial rhetorical decorum. The office does not accept vulgar syntax, the clerk explains, as if that makes this delay any more rational. You sigh and trudge home. You try not to think about the other permits in the tray. One of them has been there since Emperor Leo's reign. The parchment has yellowed so completely it now resembles pressed cheese. By week 6, you've memorized the route to the chancery and begun to name the hallway pigeons. One particularly bold bird, which walks more than it flies, you've dubbed Leonidas. He once pecked a wax seal off a military requisition scroll. This was not punished. The clerks say Leonidas is part of the process now. At week 9, your request is formally acknowledged. A junior archivist logs it in the incoming external minor petitions ledger. The archivist, whose breath smells of garlic and despair, uses a stylus made from camel bone and sighs each time he dots an I. His name is Focus, and he wears sandals all year round. You admire that. The ledger, of course, has to be countersigned. But the only available countersigner is recovering from a mild chest cold and refuses to touch ink until the feast of St. Tryphon. That's 3 weeks away. By this point, you've started bringing snacks when you visit the office. Roasted chickpeas, dates. On week 11, you bring a small pot of lentils and share it with an elderly scribe who promises to move your scroll to the front of the table. He does. The front of the table is not, however, the front of the process. Still, there is movement. The scroll is now scheduled to be translated into Latin. Not for practical reasons, mind you, it's tradition. All formal permits are stored in Latin, even though no one has spoken it conversationally since your great-uncle fell into a fish cart during a street sermon. The translator is a Stoic man named Marcus, who has translated the same love poem for 6 different clients, each time insisting it's a military edict. You wait. Sometimes you wake at night wondering if your scroll has made it to the next stage. Has it been stamped, reviewed, used as a coaster by an undersecretary? You may never know. The truth, of course, is that it's still sitting under a stack of land disputes involving a monastery and a very aggressive goat. But it's okay. You're patient. You're Byzantine now. You understand that time is not linear, but circular, and occasionally sticky. And somewhere deep in the candlelit halls of the Chancery, your scroll still waits. Quietly, proudly. Sort of like you. The parchment sighs beneath its own weight as it shifts slightly in the tray, though that might just be the draft from a window no one's remembered to close since last spring. You wouldn't know it, but today's a big day for your permit. It's being moved, not forward, of course, sideways. Yes, a clerk named Heracleos, who was recently promoted for reasons no one fully understands, decides that the current permit pending tray is too full and needs to be divided. His solution? A second tray labelled permit pending, possibly more urgent, placed precisely 3 inches to the right of the original. The papers are transferred one by one using a pair of brass tongs. Heracleos insists on this because he recently read something about ink oils and skin contact. Your scroll is now 3rd from the top in the new tray, which is exciting, in a bleak sort of way. But no one tells you this. You, of course, are still visiting every Tuesday and Thursday, sometimes bringing sweetbread in the hopes it might soften a scribe's heart. Sometimes it works. More often the sweetbread is taken with thanks and absolutely no follow-up action. Byzantium, you're starting to realize, is a place where progress is a concept, not an outcome. The scriptorium itself is a wonder of half-effort and slow decay. The walls are lined with wooden cubbies that tilt just slightly to the left, so that scrolls lean toward each other like gossiping neighbours. Spiderwebs connect the corners, and a cat, possibly named Theodora, sleeps atop the largest cabinet, twitching occasionally, as if dreaming of mice and imperial negligence. Every clerk seems to have a different understanding of their role. Some believe their task is to process permits. Others believe their role is to debate the precise definition of pergola for hours. One man, who insists on being called Euphemios the Stamp-Bearer, claims he is the only person allowed to physically touch the red wax seal of minor permits, and yet no one has seen him do so in weeks. Wax integrity must be preserved, he mutters when asked. Then he returns to carving dolphins into the handle of his stylus. You learn that your scroll must now be duplicated into the official triplicate register. This is a 3-part process involving 3 monks, 3 desks, and 3 near-identical expressions of reluctant duty. Each monk works by candlelight, hunched and hooded, muttering Latin phrases under their breath. They write slowly, reverently, as if every letter were a prayer, which it might as well be. Byzantine handwriting has so many loops and curls It looks like the language itself is trying to fall asleep. And fall asleep you nearly do on the wooden bench outside their chamber, listening to the faint creak of quills and the irregular slosh of ink bottles being stirred. Each copy must be exactly alike, or the review council will reject all three. There is no margin for error, which is ironic, because all three monks have terrible eyesight, and at least one of them is known to confuse the letter delta with the number 3. You watch a pigeon walk across one of the half-done scrolls. No one stops it. You make polite conversation with a junior scribe named Nikephoros, who has ink stains on every visible surface of his clothing. He tells you that your case is moving up the queue, which sounds promising until you learn that the queue, in this context, is not a line, but rather a loosely maintained pile on a windowsill. Sometimes the pile blows over when the wind picks up. The scrolls are gathered again in no particular order. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine Empire intentionally slowed administrative processes to create an illusion of gravitas, or if the empire simply preferred the appearance of order over the hassle of actually having it. You've now waited more than 4 months. You know this because it's cherry season again, and you remember submitting your request when the market still sold apples. Your neighbour has constructed a portico of his own, without a permit, of course. You try not to be bitter, but his customers now wait in the shade, while yours blink in the sun like confused lizards. You return to the office. A new smell greets you. Fresh beeswax polish. The staff has decided to polish the document tables instead of reviewing documents. "We've had a complaint about splinters," says a clerk. You try to smile. You fail. The truth is, you're starting to enjoy this in a strange, meditative way. The process has become part of your rhythm, like sleep or digestion or rain. And today, for the first time in weeks, something changes. A clerk named Cassian opens your scroll. You see it with your own eyes. She squints. She adjusts her veil. She actually reads the first line. You hold your breath. She frowns. She's noticed that the phrase, "with intention to shelter clientele from seasonal precipitation," could technically be interpreted as a public works request. That would reclassify your petition into a different department, one that's been without a functioning director since the incident with the horse. "Best to consult the legal phrasing committee," she says gently. You nod. You have no idea what that means. The legal phrasing committee, as it turns out, meets only twice per season. Their next gathering is set for the day after the feast of St. Arsenius. You check your calendar. That's 6 weeks from now. You go home, you make lentils, you pet your cat, you sleep poorly. Then, one drizzly morning, you wake to a miracle. An actual parchment appears at your doorstep, a thin roll bound in blue ribbon. You open it with trembling hands. It's a request for clarification. The office wants to know whether your portico would include benches, and if so, whether those benches would be affixed to the ground or movable. You laugh. Out loud, it's working. It's all happening. Progress, Byzantine style. A single toe poked forward into the river of imperial decision-making. The scroll is alive. The bureaucracy has not forgotten you. It is simply napping, mid-task. And so you reply. You write back that no, the benches will not be fixed. They will be movable. Like your patience, like time, like everything in Constantinople. You seal your reply with a modest splash of wax, deep orange, the only colour left at the market this week, and send it back with the courier. He nods solemnly, mounts his donkey, and begins the 5-block journey at what can only be described as an extremely reflective pace. You've done your part. Again. And now you wait. Again. Back in the chancery, the parchment re-enters the bloodstream of the bureaucracy. It's now a response scroll, which means it goes into a different tray, this one precariously balanced on a wooden stand that wobbles if you breathe near it. It is labelled clarification, pending internal discussion, domestic structures only. This is progress. Inside the office, the conversation has shifted. A clerk named Methodios insists that any scroll referencing benches must also be vetted by the Office of Public Resting Surfaces, a niche bureau no one has heard from since the Great Bench collapse of 902. No one knows who's in charge, Methodios says. glancing around with the intensity of a man who once lost a cousin to an unstable awning. Your scroll waits. It leans ever so slightly against another petition, something about a fountain spigot, and together they form an unspoken alliance, ignored yet not forgotten. The office cat, Theodora, still queen of her realm, curls around the tray, occasionally using it as a pillow. She has no opinions on benches, or porticos, or time. You, however, are beginning to forget what the word permit even means. You've developed new hobbies, counting mosaic tiles, brewing your own vinegar, writing short, anonymous poems about pigeons. Occasionally you try to remember what your original portico looked like. Was it stone or wood? Did you draw 3 columns or 4? Your customers still visit, bless them, squinting in the sunlight and muttering about the glare. One old man trips over a loose cobblestone. You offer him a cushion. He blesses your name, then asks if the portico is nearly done. You'd smile. It's a tired smile. It's been approved for evaluation of clarification, you say. He looks impressed. He shouldn't be, but he is. Elsewhere, in the depths of the chancery, the scroll is finally read by a man named Alexios, broad-shouldered, with ink under every fingernail. Alexios is known for moving things forward, slowly, with groaning reluctance, like pushing a reluctant donkey through wet sand. He reads your reply. He furrows his brow. He makes a note. Benches not fixed require additional seating clause. This note is filed in yet another scroll, which is then pinned to a corkboard using a sharpened fig stem. Yes, the Byzantine Empire, despite its majesty, often relied on fig stems. Paperclips won't be invented for nearly 900 years. Alexios hands your scroll to Euphemios, the stamp-bearer. You remember Euphemios, the man who refuses to use the red wax unless the moon is in a favourable quadrant. He has been carving a different animal into each of his styluses. Today's creature, a mildly irritated swan. You watch him through a smudged glass window. He squints at your scroll. He reads the first line. He reads it again. He asks, "Did we confirm that this isn't for a military structure?" Someone shrugs. They bring out the official rubric for determining martial intent in civil requests, a 17-point checklist written in dense script. Points include mentions of shields, presence of towers, and suspiciously firm masonry. Your scroll passes, barely. Just then a courier bursts in. There's been an update to the Civic Construction Manual, effective immediately. All permits involving outdoor seating must now use terminology form beta, which replaces phrases like for shade with for environmental modulation. Your scroll does not use this form. It is now non-compliant. Alexios sighs deeply. Euphemios mutters something about divine punishment. The scroll is quietly moved to the form conversion queue, a stack so tall it leans like a wine-drunk senator. Back at your home, you've begun building a model of your portico out of discarded oyster shells. You arrange them in rows, stacking them to mimic columns while customers pass by and say things like, "What a lovely abstract shrine." You don't correct them. You find yourself narrating your days like a court scribe. On this, the 143rd day of the permit pursuit, Dorotheus did fetch water and contemplate municipal hopelessness. One morning, as the sunlight filters through a particularly dusty window, you spot a familiar figure approaching. It's Spiridon, the original clerk. The original? The man with the pickled turnip aura. He's holding something. It's your scroll. Well, technically, it's your scroll plus 3 commentaries, 2 contradictory footnotes, a smudged addendum, and one inexplicable sketch of a donkey wearing a crown. He looks tired, but proud. "Good news," he says, adjusting his belt, which is far too tight for comfort. Your petition has passed initial language verification and is now awaiting primary seal approval. You blink. You're unsure whether to weep, laugh, or fall asleep standing. That night you celebrate with figs, olives, and a fresh loaf of barley bread. Your cat purrs approvingly. You imagine your portico, complete, glorious, moderately watertight, and yet even as you dream, you know there's more. The Primary Seal Approval Committee meets only once per lunar cycle. The next meeting is tentatively scheduled for a date known only as the third clear evening following the feast of St. Sampson's Goat. So you wait, of course you wait. You are Dorotheos, petitioner of porticos, merchant of mild dreams, seeker of semishade. You are eternal. The third clear evening following the feast of St. Sampson's Goat arrives with surprisingly little fanfare. The sky is cloudless. The wind carries the smell of warm bread and brined lemons. You squint toward the east, half expecting a divine sign, perhaps a double rainbow or at least a politely symbolic pigeon. But no, just the usual sounds of Constantinople, a vendor hawking spices, a goat arguing with a child, and, somewhere, the distant cough of a bureaucrat. Inside the chancery, a small circular room with teal-tinted windows hosts the elusive Primary Seal Committee. It is said they meet in silence, broken only by the occasional creak of a wax stamp being pressed into ribbon. You imagine the scene: 4 men in robes, slightly too long for practical walking, sipping watered wine and flipping scrolls like they're examining relics from another world. There's Basileos, who once denied a bathhouse permit because the word steam sounded too politically ambiguous. There's Manuel, who always carries a personal candle and never shares it. Then Stephanos, whose main contribution to meetings is tapping on the table in patterns only he understands. And finally, Eudokia, who says little, but whose stare once made a petitioner cry without a word. Your scroll is presented. Basileos reads it aloud, slowly, as though tasting each syllable. He pauses at sheltering structure with 2 freestanding benches. 2 benches, he asks, glancing sideways. Stephanos taps 3 times, then once. No one reacts. Manuel nods, but only at his candle. Eudokia makes no sound. She merely circles the word freestanding with her finger and shrugs. The scroll is passed to the center of the table, where the primary seal, a bronze medallion the size of a plum, rests on a velvet square. One of the clerks reaches for it. He pauses, he sneezes, and just like that, the scroll gets smudged. It's a minor smudge, barely noticeable. But rules are rules. A new copy must be made. You're informed by message dove 2 days later. The note is brief but formal. Permit pending reduplication. Original scroll compromised via nasal exhalation. You blink at the message, you read it 3 times, you consider taking up fishing. Still, bureaucracy does not rest, at least not all at once. The duplication is assigned to a copyist named Polycarpos, who is widely regarded as the fastest scribe in the office. He once copied an entire monastery inventory in under 4 days, though rumor says he did it while mildly concussed from walking into a hanging lamp. Polycarpos works quickly. He hums as he writes. He uses fresh ink and a stylus sharpened on a rock he keeps in his shoe. Within a week, the new copy is complete. But before it can be presented again to the Seal Committee, it must pass the ribbon affixation review. Yes, the ribbon. Your scroll is to be tied with blue linen. But not just any blue. It must be Byzantine indigo number 4, a colour so specific it can only be achieved by boiling snail shells harvested during the 2nd week of October. Supplies are low, a substitute is considered. Enter the debate. Historians still argue whether the infamous Ribbon Council dispute of 948 was an actual political standoff or just 4 men in a room arguing about thread tension. Either way, your permit now sits in the balance. A lesser indigo might suggest informality. A faded dye could imply municipal disinterest. A silk-cotton blend? Scandal. While this debate simmers, the scroll is temporarily filed under pending textile resolution. You sigh gently. At this point, you're not even surprised. You make a new batch of chickpea cakes. You daydream of alternative lives, fisherman, olive sorter, cloud historian, and then an unexpected visitor, Cassiane, the sharp-eyed clerk from the Syntax Committee. She arrives at your shop in person. She's holding something, your scroll, but also a look. Not of approval, not of pity, a look of bureaucratic determination. We've decided, she says, to initiate expedited re-review. You blink. You've never heard of such a thing. She leans in. It's a newly coined process, she whispers, mostly theoretical. And yet, here she is, and here's your scroll, and stamped on the top in fresh red wax, preliminary reconsideration authorized. She hands you a parchment. Initial conditional permission, it reads. Structure allowed under Article 11, Section F, assuming no future conflict with provincial infrastructure or ecclesiastical shadow rights. You don't know what that last part means. You don't care. You laugh. You actually laugh. You're holding permission. Not final, no. Not even formal, but permission adjacent, which is more than you've ever had. Your customers notice the change in your posture. You walk taller. You hum when you restock olive oil. You re-sketch your portico with extra flair, adding a little scalloped edge to the awning. Nothing too fancy. You don't want to spook the chancery, but of course, it's not over. Nothing is over in Byzantium until it's been reviewed twice, signed, in triplicate, and blessed by a minor saint. Back in the chancery, your scroll is now being assessed for structural harmony. This is a real thing. It ensures your portico does not, in spirit or material, clash with the adjacent civic aesthetic. A junior clerk stands across from your shop with a wax tablet, sketching the buildings nearby. He frowns at your neighbour's brickwork. He measures shadow angles with a string. He asks whether your awning will produce a visually jarring rhythm when viewed from the south. You say no? He asks again. You still say no. He nods. He writes something. He drops his wax tablet. It cracks. He sighs. The review will take time, but it's moving. You're on the map now. Your name is known. Your scroll has been folded, read, stamped, and argued over. And somewhere deep in the vaults of the Chancery, you suspect there is now a folder with your name on it. Dorotheos, merchant of tunics, seeker of shelter. Status, ongoing. You watch the sun begin to dip. The light strikes the archway where your portico will one day stand. And you smile. The review for structural harmony is ongoing. No one expected it to be quick. After all, this is the same city that spent 9 years debating whether a statue of St. Andrew looked too wistful to face east. Your modest portico, while far less emotionally expressive, is now at the mercy of the Office of Civic Aesthetics, an entity known for two things, long lunches and longer adjectives. Your scroll currently rests on the desk of an aesthetics officer named Themistocles. He wears sandals with gold buckles even in winter and carries a magnifying glass for inspecting scroll margins. His greatest passion is symmetry in urban life, a topic he once lectured on for 4 uninterrupted hours during a plumbing permit hearing. He reads your scroll aloud to his cat, which he insists senses visual dissonance. The cat blinks slowly, then attempts to eat the ribbon. This is considered a neutral opinion. Meanwhile, in a basement below the scriptorium, a trio of junior monks prepares to illustrate the margins of your scroll, because of course it must be decorated. Even the simplest permit requires marginalia, little vine patterns, curling borders, sometimes a sea monster if the petitioner seems particularly ambitious. Yours receives ivy and a sleepy goat. The goat was not requested, the goat just happened. Back at your shop you wait. Your patience has ripened into something richer, something fermented and oddly calming. You now view time the way a gardener views compost, slow, fragrant, and vaguely transformative. You've begun to hand-sew a curtain for your imaginary portico. Customers admire it. One asks if the permit has been approved. You nod, then shake your head, then just say, "It's in the ribbon phase." People understand. Somehow they always understand. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine Empire's slow processes were part of a conscious political strategy, or simply the natural consequence of 11 layers of administration, 3 different dialects, and a passionate love affair with red tape. Regardless, the effect was the same. Delay became a civic art, and now that art takes a new turn. Your permit is flagged, not for a violation, not for content, but for historical reference inaccuracy. Yes, apparently your drawing of the proposed portico includes an architectural feature common in Thessaloniki, specifically a cornice style that was briefly banned in Constantinople after the decorative tile quarrel of 889. A decorative choice, not structural, but enough to pause the process. You are asked to revise your drawing. You sigh, you sharpen your quill. You spend the better part of an evening redrawing the roofline, muttering at your cat, who clearly doesn't care. You remove the cornice. You replace it with a modest lintel. You add a note at the bottom. Revised for harmony and historical compliance. May this satisfy the Aesthetics Council and all their pets. You submit it and wait. Weeks pass. Then, progress. A clerk named Zine, known for her ability to juggle 5 scrolls and still keep her braids immaculate, brings your revised petition to the front desk with a little green ribbon. Green is the colour of pre-final review. You nearly faint, but don't celebrate just yet. Before final approval, the petition must be stamped with the minor permit seal of civil compliance. This seal, unfortunately, has gone missing. The entire chancery is in mild uproar. Someone remembers seeing it last during a papyrus weighing demonstration. Someone else insists it was taken by a visiting delegation from Nicaea. Euphemios, the stamp-bearer, is furious. He swears an oath upon his stylus, the one with the dolphin carving, and declares a full stamp reclamation search. The office halts all minor sealings. You offer to carve a new one. They politely decline. Instead, they assign the task to a craftsman known as Ioannis the Slightly Accurate. He is famous for recreating seals to within several plausible millimeters. It takes him 12 days and 2 failed attempts. On the 13th, he delivers the new seal, slightly oblong, a bit sticky, but serviceable. The seal is tested on a sample scroll. It presses unevenly. This causes a philosophical dispute about whether authority is tied to clarity of impression. Stephanos taps the table 23 times in protest. Eventually, a consensus is reached. The new seal may be used, but only on scrolls with no theological implications. Your portico blessedly qualifies, and so on a cold Tuesday morning, your scroll is finally stamped. The wax presses into the parchment with a gentle squelch. The sound is, to your ears, more beautiful than a choir. The clerk holds it up. The others nod. Even the cat yawns approvingly. A pigeon is dispatched. You receive the final scroll 2 days later. It arrives with ribbon, seal, and a small footnote warning against expansion without future review. You run your fingers over the wax. You smell the ink. You cry, just a little. The permit is real. It is yours. And now you must do the thing no one truly expects in Byzantium. You must build. You stand before your modest home, final permit in hand, as the morning sun casts long shadows across the cobbled street. The scroll is tucked inside its ribbon sheath, wax seal still warm to the touch, possibly because you've been carrying it against your chest like a relic. This is the moment. Your neighbours watch from their thresholds with a mix of disbelief and civic awe. One mutters, "He actually got it," like he's seen someone climb Mount Olympus in sandals. Another crosses herself. Children giggle. Even the pigeons seem respectfully quiet this morning. You lay the scroll on your work table and begin sketching the final construction diagram. Nothing extravagant, 2 wooden posts, 1 tiled awning, and a gently sloped roof to direct rainwater away from the customer's ankles. Simple, reasonable, portico. But before you can begin the physical work, there's just one tiny formality, just a whisper of a final step. The builder's notification scroll. Yes, the city must be informed before construction begins. Not to approve it, they already did, but to acknowledge awareness of your intention to proceed. It's a single-page form, very straightforward. All you need is one clerk's signature. Any clerk will do. So naturally, it takes 9 days. First, the scroll must be printed. Unfortunately, the Chancery's designated scribe for short forms, young Andreas, is out with a tooth infection. His replacement, Melania, is perfectly capable, but insists on rewording the form to make it sound less passive-aggressive. You wait. Meanwhile, your building materials begin to arrive. Planks of cedar, stacks of curved tiles, a little bronze rooster to perch at the roof's peak, just for flair. You store everything behind your shop and cover it with an oiled cloth. You don't want to be fined for preemptive assembly without disclosure, a real violation. When the notification form finally reaches you, it's slightly damp and smells faintly of soup. The ink has bled a little on the line that reads intended commencement date. You fill it out with care, you leave no blanks, you deliver it in person. And that's when you meet Bion, the last bureaucrat between you and your blessed portico. He's very tall, with a faint moustache that refuses to grow properly. His robe is too short. He greets you with a yawn so sincere it makes you yawn too. You hand him the scroll. He frowns. Not because of a problem. Bion always frowns. This line, he says, pointing at the time of day you intend to start building. You wrote mid-morning. We prefer an exact hour. You adjust it, 4th hour after sunrise. He nods slowly, then adds, I'll just need to consult the Committee of Temporal Definitions to verify that aligns with current solar records. You laugh. He does not. And so your scroll disappears again, this time into a side office devoted entirely to timekeeping, run by a pair of elderly twins who haven't agreed on what sunrise means since 931 CE. Historians still argue whether this office was ever necessary or simply created as a retirement assignment for the elderly brothers, who once spent 4 years measuring the length of a shadow during Lent. Regardless, your form must now be stamped with a temporal accuracy seal. This seal is shaped like a small sun and must be applied during the time you intend to begin building, which means you have to show up at mid-morning just to get the stamp that confirms you can begin. At mid-morning, you do it. You show up, you wait, you receive the stamp, you run, yes, actually run back to your shop. And finally, with sweat on your brow and scrolls in your satchel, you begin. You drive the first stake into the earth. The wood thuds with a satisfying chunk. You pour a little oil at its base, an offering to Saint Elpidios, patron of minor construction efforts. You tie a ribbon at the top, a fragment from the original scroll you no longer need, a symbolic gesture. Customers applaud. A neighbor offers you a plum. Someone tries to start a chant. You wave them off, gently. You work in the sun, shirt sleeves rolled, hands calloused with purpose. Your friend Leontios helps hoist the beams. His cousin holds the tiles in place as you hammer. Children bring nails, a dog supervises. It takes 3 days. Not because it's difficult, but because you pause often to marvel at the progress. By day 3, the portico stands, shaded, sturdy, and glorious in its humble geometry. You sit beneath it with a cup of watered wine, watching people pass through the shade for the first time. Someone sighs audibly. Another leans against the post and murmurs, This is civilization. A clerk passes by, one of the triplicate scribes. He stops. He squints. He says, Ah, so this is the portico. Then he writes something in a little black notebook and keeps walking. You don't even care what it says, because for the first time in a year and a half, or perhaps 4 years, depending on how one counts delays, you have done it. You, Dorotheos, merchant of tunics, have faced the Byzantine bureaucracy and emerged with a structure, a roof, a place to stand when the rains come, and that, you realize, might be the very definition of victory in Constantinople. Of course, just because you've built it doesn't mean you're finished with the bureaucracy. No, friend. This is Byzantium. Here, a structure is not truly recognized until it's acknowledged post-construction by the Department of Minor Erection Reviews. Yes, it's a thing, and yes, the name causes some giggles among the younger clerks, but the paperwork is real. And the consequences of non-compliance? Even realer. So, 5 days after your glorious little portico is finally complete, after the last tile is polished and the goat-shaped curtain hook is firmly installed, you receive a note. Rolled tight, tied with orange twine, smelling faintly of damp cedar. You break the seal and read the message, which is written in perfect formal Greek. Be it known that a final site inspection shall be conducted within a span of 14 days, barring ecclesiastical events, military activity, or seasonal humidity fluctuations. You fold the scroll and sigh deeply. The inspection is coming, and so you prepare. You sweep, you oil the columns, you even scrub the cobblestones leading up to the threshold. Your cat, unimpressed by it all, continues to nap precisely where she pleases, often underfoot. But you are undeterred. Then come the rumours. One of your neighbours, an old widow with a soft spot for gossip and dried figs, tells you she heard the inspector is none other than Leon Argyros, a man infamous for his passion for perpendicularity. The last time he conducted a site review, he made a fishmonger dismantle and reassemble his store because the angle of entry was metaphysically discouraging. Another vendor once claimed Leon rejected a bread stand on the grounds that its canopy evoked excessive ambition. No one knows what that means, but it sounds ominous. So naturally, you panic. You rush to adjust the tilt of your awning. You realign the benches by half a palm's width. You remove the tiny decorative rooster from the roof, just in case. You try to make the whole thing look, well, modest, quietly confident, Byzantinely neutral. When the day of the inspection arrives, the air is thick with anticipation and humidity. A fine mist hangs in the sky like a bad omen. Leon Argyros appears exactly at mid-morning. He's dressed in layered robes of brown and brass with a square measure hanging from his belt and a rolled parchment that you suspect contains a checklist written in the tiniest possible script. He says nothing at first. He circles, he squints, he kneels to examine the base of one column, tapping it twice with his stylus. You stand absolutely still. After a full 3 minutes of measured silence, Leon speaks. "This joint," he says, pointing to where the portico beam meets your wall. "It is acceptably affixed." Your breath catches. "Overhang?" he asks, raising an eyebrow. "4 palms, you reply. He nods, scribbles. "Benches?" "Not fixed. Movable. Confirmed." During clarification stage. He actually smiles, just slightly. It's unnerving. He circles again. He pokes the canopy. He stands under the structure and lets a single raindrop fall on his sleeve. He sniffs it. "Why? You don't ask." And then, with a final approving grunt, he stamps your wall. Yes, your wall. The inspector's sigil, a small blue spiral, is pressed onto a plaster patch near your entryway. It's official, permanent, and it means you've passed. You want to cry. Instead, you thank him. He nods once, turns on his heel, and disappears into the mist. Later that day, your neighbours drop by one, like pilgrims visiting a holy site. They run their fingers over the blue spiral. They murmur things like real structure, and he did it. Someone brings you honey cakes. Someone else plays a tiny flute. You sit beneath your portico, shaded from the drizzle, and watch your city breathe. Across the way, you see another merchant unfolding a wrinkled scroll. He's staring at a blank wall and gesturing to where he'd like to build. You catch his eye and nod solemnly. He nods back. You understand each other. It's more than a roof. It's a rite of passage. Of course, it's not all peace and pastry. There's one more scroll to submit, the post-construction usage report. A formality, really. It asks what the structure is being used for, whether any chairs were added, and if any part of it inadvertently became sentient, which is a joke, probably. But you fill it out anyway. You walk to the chancery for old time's sake and hand it to a clerk you've never seen before, young, bright-eyed, painfully optimistic. He glances at the form and says, "Oh, you'll need the green wax for this." You freeze. He continues, "Don't worry, I know where it is." You blink. You've never, ever heard a clerk say that, and within moments he returns, with the green wax, unbroken, melted and pressed while you wait. The stamp lands on your form like the final chord of a lullaby. You're finished. Well, for now. Because in the distance, you hear whispers of a new ordinance, something about regulating the colour of awnings, something about visual hierarchy in civic canopies. You smile, you pour a cup of wine. Let them come. You've built a portico in Byzantium. Nothing can scare you now. By week 3 of owning a legal, inspected, and sealed portico, you begin to experience something strange. It's not joy, not exactly. Joy would be too energetic, too sparkly. This is more like a low, humming satisfaction, the kind that comes from sitting in shade you built yourself while eating almonds you traded for with a customer who also sat in that shade. You start to notice things. The way the afternoon sun slides across your awning and spills over the bench at just the right hour. How the rainwater rolls off the tiled edge and into the street like a polite little waterfall. How people naturally congregate beneath it, some to talk, others to nap, a few to whisper local gossip in the shelter of semi-permanence. Your portico has become a place, not just a structure, not a box ticked on a form, but a tiny piece of the city's living skin. And in Byzantium, place matters. Of course, this newfound sense of civic glory can't last unchallenged. One afternoon, a man in a woolen tunic approaches you with a squint of someone about to deliver either news or taxes. He introduces himself as Meliton, a field assessor of urban enhancements. You've never heard of that department, no one has, but he has a clipboard, a wax slab with a cracked corner, and the confident gait of someone who eats anchovies straight from the jar. He looks over your portico, nods slowly, taps the bench, then turns to you. "We're compiling a list," he says. "Of what?" "Public conveniences with semi-private usage metrics." You stare blankly. Byzantium, once again, has weaponized vocabulary. Meliton explains that your portico, though approved and built, now qualifies as a shared usage shadow zone, a newly defined classification that affects structures which cast partial shade over common walkways but are privately maintained. Your structure, it seems, contributes aesthetically to the public good, and therefore might be eligible for something called shade tax relief, or it might be fined for implied civic domination. It depends, naturally. You ask what determines which applies. He flips his wax slab over. There are symbols, squiggles, possibly a diagram of a donkey. He shrugs. Still being debated. You thank him, he thanks you back. You both stand in silence, under the portico, enjoying the shade. Eventually, he adds, "Your awning is 2 fingers past the acceptable flourish limit, just something to consider." Then he walks away, leaving you with questions, a slight breeze, and the sense that your architectural saga may never fully end. Historians still argue whether Byzantine urban codes were written as actual legal frameworks or simply as aspirational poetry. Some scrolls describing property lines use metaphors like "where the rooster's shadow ends," or "to the point where one no longer hears the fish seller's cry." Helpful? Debatable? Beautiful? Absolutely. Later that week you receive an invitation. Yes, a formal invitation. You've been asked to present your portico to the Civic Guild of Modest Constructions, a committee that meets quarterly to celebrate small, successful building efforts. You're flattered. You iron your tunic. The gathering takes place in a courtyard behind the old mint, where tables are laid with pomegranate juice, barley crackers, and cold stuffed grape leaves. Other citizens are there too, each having built something: a staircase, a fence, a commemorative pigeon perch. You are asked to share your journey. You begin modestly, but as the story unfolds, the 4-year timeline, the scrolls, the stamp shortage, the donkey with the crown, you notice the others leaning in. One woman gasps, another nods solemnly. Someone weeps softly into his fig pastry. You finish with the phrase, and then, "I built." The courtyard erupts in gentle applause, not loud, just enough to ruffle the tablecloths. A representative from the Chancery stands and declares your portico an exemplary instance of compliant construction. You are given a small medallion, a bronze disc with a faint etching of a bench under an arch. You wear it on a cord around your neck for the rest of the day. On the way home, you notice something. Others are building. Your neighbour, the fishmonger with the slanted stall, has laid the first stone for a tiny awning. Across the street, the barber now has a rope between 2 poles with a curtain that flutters like a flag of soft resistance. and you, Dorotheus, have become a precedent. People ask to borrow your measurements. They sketch your roofline in charcoal. They point to your goat curtain hook and say things like, elegant yet obedient to form. And through it all, your portico remains. Steady, shaded, stamped. There's talk of a new rule coming down from the city council, something about shade permit consolidation initiatives. You hear murmurs of scrolls being revised, ledgers being adjusted, even a potential freeze on new overhang applications. But you don't panic. You sit beneath your roof, you sip your tea, and you smile at the line of customers sheltering under your little marvel, none of whom know the full, sprawling, parchment-scented tale of how it came to be. By now, your portico has outgrown its origins. It began as an idea, a modest notion, a sketch on parchment. But now it's something else entirely. It's a landmark, a whispered suggestion, a point of reference for every clerk who wants to prove that the system can work, sometimes with effort, under ideal weather conditions. People pass by and nod at it. Some touch the post as they walk under, like it brings luck. A monk once sat beneath it for an entire afternoon, scribbling in his little book and humming a hymn that sounded suspiciously like a recipe. You've taken to keeping a small stool beneath the awning, just to the left of the bench. That's your spot. Not officially marked, but universally recognized. There you sip lukewarm tea, chat with passers-by, and offer quiet advice to any brave soul holding a scroll. But peace, as always, is temporary in Byzantium. One morning, a delegation arrives from the Office of Civic Conformity. You weren't expecting a delegation. No one ever is. 3 individuals dressed identically in sea-green robes with matching sandals and deeply furrowed brows stand before your portico holding identical wax boards. They don't speak at first. They tilt, slightly, in unison, as if trying to determine whether your portico has shifted, grown, or developed unapproved ambitions in the night. Eventually, the leader steps forward. Her name is Zoe. She does not smile. We've received a report, she says, that your portico may qualify as a transitional structure. You blink. Is that good? She doesn't answer. Instead, she unrolls a scroll, thick, ornate, unnecessarily heavy, and points to a paragraph 3/4 of the way down. Transitional structures, she reads, are those which exist between categories, defying strict typology, and thereby requiring additional review under Articles 14c through 17k. You exhale slowly. And what exactly does that mean? She consults a footnote. It means your portico may need a multi-contextual usage clarification scroll. Of course it does. You invite them to sit under the awning. They decline. 2 of them write that down, then they pace, they measure. One leans against the bench, then notes that it offers a comfort level inconsistent with minor use designation. This apparently is alarming. Your neighbour, who once built an unauthorized awning using leftover boat canvas, watches from behind a basket of grapes and mouths the words, "You poor fool." Historians still argue whether the Byzantine Empire invented bureaucracy or merely perfected it. There are scrolls from the 10th century listing tax categories for different types of wind. Another divides shade into cast, dappled, and mood adjacent. You have entered this zone now. A week later, you receive a letter. It is 3 pages long, folded into a triangle, sealed with blue wax, and delivered by a boy who refuses to make eye contact. It reads, "Notice of potential cross-functional overlap, pending investigation. You may be in violation of Shade Use Ordinance 5e, subsection Informal Gatherings. The problem? Your portico may be too welcoming. Yes, too welcoming." They cite an incident where a small group of musicians briefly took shelter under it during a drizzle. One sang, the others clapped, an old man danced. That, according to the letter, may constitute a spontaneous civic happening, a phenomenon that must be reported, approved, and possibly fined. You laugh. You actually laugh. Lee laugh, because it's absurd and because it's Byzantium. Still, a fine could be substantial. So you do what any reasonable citizen would. You apply for temporary leniency during clarification review. It's a form you didn't know existed. No one does until they need it. You fill it out, you file it, and you wait. While you wait, you make improvements, quiet ones. You hang a little bell from the left beam, not because it's required, but because you like the sound. You plant rosemary in 2 pots beneath the awning, mostly to confuse the pigeons. People comment, smells nice. Good for the joints. You should charge for this. You don't charge, but you do keep a small jar on the bench labelled for repairs, tea, and indulgent scroll fees. One day, a girl places a silver coin in it and says, "My grandfather told me this place helped him get through the flood." You don't know what flood, you just nod. That night, you sit under your portico and watch the city shimmer. The Bosphorus sighs in the distance. Lamps flicker behind carved shutters. You can hear someone playing a soft melody on a lyre. It might even be in tune. And for a brief, perfect moment, you forget all about the scrolls and the seals and the laws governing structural mood. You're just under your roof, safe, dry, home. Somewhere deep inside the Chancery's lower archives, a place you once described as the damp underbelly of a dictionary, your name now lives on 3 scrolls, 2 supplemental footnotes, and 1 wax tablet that simply reads Dorotheos, possibly overshaded. It's a legacy. And legacies, as Byzantium reminds you constantly, are things you must tend. The latest complication comes not in the form of a complaint, but a compliment, a very official compliment, which in this empire is more dangerous than an accusation. You receive it on a fine morning tucked inside a courier's satchel, sealed in red wax with a flourish that practically shouts, "Be suspicious." You break it open. You read, "Be it known that the Civic Council for Urban Pleasantness has identified your portico as an outstanding contributor to local harmony." That sounds nice. But then you see the second part. As such, your structure is hereby nominated for inclusion in the Registry of Municipally Notable Constructions, Provisional List, Ward 3, subsection E. You reread it twice because you know what this means. If accepted into this registry, your humble, sleepily constructed portico will no longer be just yours. It will become heritage, and heritage in Byzantium means oversight, regulations, weekly inspections, possibly a commemorative plaque. You picture a plaque, you picture people trying to touch it, tour groups, scholars, a man with a feathered hat giving inaccurate historical tours while standing on your bench. You sit down beneath your awning and whisper, "No." Not like this. So, naturally you write a letter. You draft it carefully using a fine brush and your best parchment. It is humble, respectful, just assertive enough to avoid sounding like you're hiding something, but not so bold as to attract a re-review of your original permit. You request that your structure be considered too personally attached to its owner to qualify for detached municipal distinction. You add a footnote. The builder frequently naps beneath it. 2 weeks pass, 3. Finally, you receive a reply. The envelope is noticeably smaller, the wax paler. This is good. Inside is a single line. Request acknowledged. Provisional listing withdrawn. Please maintain a minimum of 3 pigeons worth of clearance around your structure. Success. You dance. You don't mean to, but you do. Later, a customer catches you mid-twirl and asks if you're celebrating. You pause, straighten your tunic, and simply say, "No plaque." He nods, deep understanding. Historians still argue whether Byzantines feared plaques more than taxes. There are entire treatises devoted to the question, can a structure remain humble if it has a brass description? Most conclude, probably not. The following week is quiet. You polish the beams, re-secure the bell, replace one of the roof tiles after a particularly dramatic sneeze from a passing monk dislodged it. You even repaint the small carved goat hook. Your cat sleeps beneath the bench most afternoons now. Occasionally she bats at customers' sandals. They find it charming. One man leaves a dried sardine in thanks, but just as you begin to truly relax, the wind changes, literally. A strong gust comes in from the sea, tangling the curtains and scattering a stack of invoices you hadn't secured. You chase them. You retrieve all but one. That one, of course, is the one with the maintenance log entry from 2 months ago. You had dutifully noted that you replaced a beam fastener with one slightly larger than the original. You hadn't thought much of it. But now it's gone, and without a record of it, you risk being found non-compliant in your upkeep obligations. Yes, that's a thing. You could be reclassified as a structure of evolving integrity, a category so vague even the clerks struggle to explain it. It mostly results in scrolls being shuffled between departments until someone gives up and sends a fine. You act fast, you write a new entry, you make it better, cleaner, with measurements. You even include a small diagram. Then, because you've learned from experience, you submit it in person. You march it down to the Office of Ongoing Structural Honesty, which is really just a side room with peeling paint and a clerk who may or may not be asleep. You slide the parchment forward. The clerk opens one eye, glances at your diagram and asks, "What species of wood did you use?" You answer, "Cedar, coastal, moderate grain." He grunts, scribbles something, then waves you off. You walk home, whistling. Later that evening, you host your first unofficial gathering beneath the portico. Just 5 people, 6 if you count the lyre player, who mostly just eats olives and plays 2 notes. You share wine, soft cheese, and laughter that echoes down the alley like a lullaby. You sit beneath your roof, watching the flame of a lantern flicker against the beams you once fought so hard to install. You think about every scroll, every wax seal, every misplaced clause, every bird-related setback. And you smile, because this shade, this space, it's yours, entirely, beautifully, bureaucratically yours. It's around this time, roughly 493 days since you first submitted your building permit, that your portico achieves what few structures in Byzantium ever do. It becomes boring, not bad, boring, not neglected or forgotten. No, peaceful, boring. The kind of boring that lets other people assume it has always been there, as natural as cobblestones, as expected as the 4th call to prayer drifting over the rooftops. And that, in this city of scrolls and seals, is the highest compliment a structure can receive. You begin to notice how people behave differently under it now. They pause more, they speak softly. They lower their voices, not because of any rule, but because the air under your portico feels like it has absorbed just enough waiting to make it sacred. Sometimes you catch travellers admiring it. Functional, one says. Very Byzantine, says another. You nod proudly from behind your display of tunics. You've started hanging them beneath the awning now, safe from rain, sun, and unexpected donkey traffic. Then, one ordinary morning, something truly extraordinary happens. You are visited by a student, a real one, scroll underarm, smudged fingers. That look in his eyes, like he just memorized the entire layout of the Great Palace and forgot his own name in the process. He introduces himself as Lysandros, and he's conducting a modest inquiry into non-imperial architectural persistence in the civic sphere. You nod as if that makes sense. He asks if he can measure your portico. You say yes. For the next 3 hours, Lysandros measures every visible element, length, width, tile spacing, bench depth, even the precise angle at which the curtain falls when nudged by a breeze. He makes tiny humming noises as he works. At one point, he apologizes to the cat for stepping on her tail. Then he unrolls a scroll and says, "Would you mind answering a few questions for the urban continuity records?" You chuckle. "Is this part of the university?" "No," he says, straight-faced. "This is part of the archives of buildings that almost didn't happen." You stop chuckling. He asks you about your original permit. You recount the story. Not the whole thing, just the essential spirals, the triple copy monks, the stamp shortage, the man who sneezed during inspection. He listens intently, scribbling everything down with the gravity of a monk copying scripture. When you finish, he looks at you and says, Do you know how rare this is? You raise an eyebrow. This, he gestures, this is the only minor structure built in Ward 3 over the last 4 years with full legal completion. You blink. Surely not the only. He shows you a list. It's very short. Apparently your portico, your humble, 2-post, semi-curtained shade shrine, is now a case study in municipal possibility. Lysandros thanks you. He offers to send you a copy of his report. You say yes, mostly because you're curious whether he'll call the goat hook decorative or symbolic. He leaves you with one final statement. You've changed how they define compliance. You nod, then go back to selling tunics. That night, you sit beneath the awning with a bowl of figs and watch the city exhale. Oil lamps flicker in the windows. Somewhere, a baker's cart squeaks along the stone. A pair of children play at the edge of your portico, inventing rules for a game that makes no sense and doesn't need to. Then, without fanfare, a man approaches. Older, weathered. He carries no scroll, no questions. He simply steps beneath your awning, looks up at the roofline and says, "You know, I tried to build one of these once." You nod slowly. He doesn't elaborate. He just sits. You offer him a handful of roasted chickpeas. He accepts. You say nothing else. You don't have to. You both sit in the shade, listening to the city rustle and settle into itself. Historians still argue whether civic structures in Byzantium served their intended purposes or became monuments to the process itself. But for you, right now, this portico is doing exactly what it was meant to do. It shades, it shelters, it holds the space, and after all that waiting, so do you. You begin to suspect your portico has a soul. Not in the dramatic, lightning-strike divine whisper sense, no. This soul is subtle, quiet, shaped by scrolls and sweat and the slow settling of wood beams into stone. You notice it in the way the structure creaks slightly at dusk, as though exhaling after a long day. In the way the sun slices across the roof just so, casting a perfect sliver of gold onto the bench at the 9th hour. In the way the curtain flutters like it's nodding at old memories, and in the way people act differently beneath it. One afternoon, a fishmonger stands under your awning while retying his sandal strap. He finishes, straightens up and mutters, "This is a good place to tie a sandal." He leaves you a small mackerel in thanks. That evening, a scribe leans against your post to reread a love letter. He chuckles softly, presses the parchment to his chest, then walks off, humming a hymn about saints who probably never dealt with zoning permits. You smile. This is what it's all for. Of course, in Byzantium, nothing stays peacefully bureaucrat-free for long. A notice appears, tacked to your post with a wax thumbprint seal. The message reads, "To all private structure owners, please report any and all public use events exceeding 3 participants, so as to ensure compliance with the urban congregation regulation." You groan. You just hosted your nephew's name day lunch. 6 people, 2 jugs of wine, and 1 retired guard who told the same story about fighting off a goat for 20 minutes. You reread the notice. It's vague, as always. Public use event could mean anything from a street sermon to a shared yawn. Still, you don't want trouble, so you report yourself. Yes. You walk into the chancery again and file a voluntary congregation occurrence form. The clerk looks baffled. "No one's ever done that," he says. You shrug. "Figured it was easier this way." He stamps it, hands you a biscuit. You have no idea why. You eat it anyway. And that might have been the end of it, if not for the inspection. Yes. Another one. Because once you file a congregation form, your structure is subject to review under Civic Assembly Safeguard Protocols. The inspector this time is named Eugenios. He arrives early, wears boots that click dramatically, and carries an ink pot the size of a melon. He measures your bench height, notes the number of guests seated simultaneously, examines the density of social exchange. You ask, "How is that measured?" He points to a device, basically a wooden box with a sliding tile, that he says tracks conversational frequency. You're not convinced it does anything, but you nod politely anyway. Then Eugenios sees the curtain. He tilts his head. His quill hovers. This could be interpretive. You freeze. He elaborates. Curtains, when drawn, may give the impression of private intention within a semi-public space, thus encouraging ambiguous gathering practices. You reply calmly, it's for wind. He scribbles something, you add, and pigeons. He underlines something, you make tea. By the time he leaves, your structure has been classified as permeably social. You're not sure what that means, but the stamp on the inspection form is green, and that usually suggests not currently illegal. You post the form on the beam next to the goat hook. It flaps gently in the breeze like a bureaucratic prayer flag. Later, a merchant passes by and asks, "Are you worried they'll shut it down?" You laugh. Not because it's funny, but because you've forgotten how to respond to such a question without laughing. "No," you say. "They'd have to file a form first." He grins. "Then may your posts remain plum and your inspections infrequent." That night, as the sun fades and the lamplighters make their slow pilgrimage from street to street, you sit beneath your portico with a cup of fennel tea. The street hums. The curtain flutters. Your cat, bored of bureaucracy, curls around your ankles. You wonder if any of the scrolls filed in your name will survive the next century. If a bored historian, centuries from now, will stumble upon your file and say, "Ah, Dorotheos, the man with the bench." You kind of hope they do, not because you want to be remembered, but because you want them to know it can be done, you can build a thing. A simple, quiet thing, even here. Even then, and you can sit beneath it and just be. It's a crisp morning when you find a new scroll tucked into the bench cushion. No wax seal, no ribbon, just a bit of string and the faintest whiff of oregano, possibly from the sandwich a clerk had been eating while writing it. You unroll it with the usual caution. The ink is fresh, but the handwriting is unconfident, like someone still learning the difference between municipal tone and passive-aggressive commentary. It reads, "Dear Dorotheos, I hope this message finds you and your portico well. I am a new trainee in the Office of Informal Structures. I was assigned your file for study and it's fascinating. I didn't know we even had a classification for successfully concluded minor civic construction via complete legal channels without bribery or horse-based interruptions." You smile. Would it be possible to come and observe the portico in person for research? And maybe inspiration? It's signed simply Thalia. You make tea, you clean the bench. And when she arrives mid-afternoon, shy-eyed, scrolls bundled under one arm like a nervous bouquet, you welcome her under the portico. She sits, silently, gratefully. You say, "There's a soft spot on the left side of the bench." She moves slightly. Then you both sit. The street bustles around you, a child chasing a hoop, a fruit vendor bickering with a very confident parrot, the distant clang of a bell that may or may not signal anything important. Thalia begins asking questions. What kind of wood did you use? How did you choose the curtain length? Was it true that you had to file a ribbon affixation clarification scroll? You answer, patiently, humorously, with the tone of someone who's been through every inch of Byzantine process and come out somehow calm. She listens like someone studying a sacred text. At one point, she pulls out a little biscuit and offers you half. "Bureaucrat snack," she says. "Dry, but emotionally comforting." You nod. Like most of the chancery. Later, as the light slants golden through the lattice of the awning, she sketches your portico. Not just the structure, but the way it lives in the street, the lean of the beam, the angle of the cat's nap, the soft puddle of shade curling around your sandals. "It's peaceful," she says. You sip your tea. "Took 4 years," she laughs, surprised at her own voice echoing through the quiet. Then she grows serious. "I read your file," she says. "The delays, the rubber stamps, the form rejections. You shouldn't have succeeded." You look at her. "I know." She tilts her head. Why didn't you give up? You pause, think, then answer, because I needed the shade. That silences her, not sadly, thoughtfully. You both sit a while longer. The world spins on. Eventually she stands, brushes crumbs from her robe, and says, "Thank you." She walks off with the posture of someone newly aware that paperwork may not be the enemy, just the terrain. Historians still argue whether Byzantine bureaucracy was an act of control, a test of faith, or simply the empire's most persistent architectural material. But there's no debating this. Once something was approved, it lasted. You stay seated after she leaves. The curtain flutters. You lean back, stretch your legs, and listen to the sound of nothing in particular. Then quietly, a voice pipes up from the left. "Excuse me." A boy, no more than 12, stands nervously at the edge of the portico. He's clutching a small parchment in both hands. "My uncle wants to build a bread store," he says. "He says you're the reason he thinks it's possible." You squint at the boy, at the scroll, at the wide-eyed, hopeful face waiting for advice. You pat the bench. "Sit down," you say. "I'll tell you how it started." The boy's name is Petros. His sandals are too big, and his scroll is too blank. He sits gingerly, as though the bench might collapse from too much optimism. You reassure him, light joke, light smile, easy cadence. You've learned how to do that now, the way clerks use small talk, to delay and redirect. Only yours comes with less ink and more soul. "So," he asks, hugging the parchment to his chest, "do I just write what he wants to build?" You nod. That's the beginning. He opens it, revealing only a heading. Proposal for bread vending platform. Modest. Modest. A good sign. You guide him. "How big is it?" you ask. He thinks. "Big enough for 3 loaves across. Maybe a little shelf underneath?" You nod. Describe that, but don't say little shelf. Say supportive understructure for temporary storage. He blinks. That's allowed. You grin. "It's preferred." And so begins the ritual, teaching the next one how to phrase things, how to sound formal but not challenging, specific but not interesting. Bureaucracy, after all, is an art of camouflage. You teach him to write like a shadow, shaped like a loaf of bread. You tell him about spacing, about perimeter clauses, about the difference between provisional clearance and transitory consent, terms that mean the same thing but have different stamp colours. He listens like a sponge with legs. As the sun slides across your portico, warming the grain of the wood, you guide him line by line. You make him pause to sip water. You tell him about your curtain saga. He laughs, real laughter, the kind you once forgot how to do during your 4th month, waiting for a seal that never arrived. You end with a gentle warning. You'll want 3 copies, 2 for the office, 1 for the pigeon. He stops. You're joking. You stare at him, then whisper, "Never underestimate pigeons." By dusk, his scroll has life. It's not perfect. The grammar wobbles in places. There's a coffee stain shaped like cypress. But it's real. It's more than most people ever get to, and when he rolls it up, ties it with a shoelace, and stands to leave, he says something that nearly undoes you. "I didn't think it could be done, not really. But now, it seems possible." You watch him vanish into the crowd, scroll bouncing at his side like a sword with no handle yet. You sit quietly under your roof and think, maybe that's what a portico is for, not just shade, but proof. A physical promise that sometimes persistence works, sometimes paperwork yields fruit, sometimes, however slowly, however absurdly, you can build the thing. The next morning, there's another visitor. This time, it's a woman in a red shawl, nose dusted with flour. She glances at your roof, then at the bench, then at you. "I heard you helped a boy write a scroll," she says. You nod. She sits, opens her apron, produces a form with 3 scribbled lines and a drawing of what might be a chimney or a goose. And so it continues. They arrive like rain. A potter with a dream of a shaded kiln. A widow with plans for a bench under her fig tree, A man who just wants to repair the corner of his awning without triggering a pre-existing roof conflict notification. You help each one, not because you must, because you can. The Chancery begins to notice scrolls referencing the Dorotheos precedent start to appear. A clerk named Myron adds a note to a training ledger. See Portico case for successful multi-phase completion with minimal chaos. Eventually a whisper reaches you. The Office of Civic Formulation is considering drafting a new example template based on your original petition. Historians still argue whether the spread of form clarity in the mid-900s was due to reform, accident, or one overbuilt tunic vendor with infinite patience. You know the truth. It's the Portico. It taught you how to wait, how to rewrite, how to carry a structure in your mind long enough for the world to catch up. You taught others how to do the same. And under your roof, people learn to believe in process, even when that process involves arguing about pigeon attendance and curtain wind disruption metrics. You sit back, the cat climbs onto your lap, a breeze lifts the hem of the curtain, the rosemary sways, and you realize that the very thing you feared, bureaucracy becoming your whole life, has somehow become your gift. Your portico stands not just as a roof, but as a gentle revolution. By the time the third scroll arrives, addressed only to the man with the portico, you no longer flinch at surprises. You unroll it beneath your awning as the late morning light spills like warmed milk across the bench. The paper is fine, thin, clean, no suspicious soup stains, and the handwriting elegant, careful, the kind produced by someone who practices their flourishes before breakfast. It's from a woman named Hypatia. She writes from the Office of Interdepartmental Oversight Liaison Formatting, which is, to your knowledge, a department made entirely of abbreviations. Her message is simple. We are compiling a training manual for junior clerks. We would like to include your story. You pause, teacup on hovering mid-air. A manual. You reread the line, not your scrolls, not your permit, but your story. And for a moment your brain does something unusual. It goes completely quiet. No background muttering about fees, no mental checklist of potential post-approval addendums, just silence. And, beneath it, a small, warm breath of pride. You reply that same day. I would be honored. Just please leave out the part with the missing wax stamp and the goat impersonation, unless it helps. You never find out whether they include it. But weeks later, a courier delivers a packet. Inside is a slim volume, bound in soft leather, embossed with a little spiral. The title reads, How the Process Can Work, a Clerk's Companion. You flip through. Near the back, in a chapter called Against the Odds, is your tale. It's been polished, stylized a little. Euphemios, the stamp-bearer, is described as enigmatic. Your triple copy monks are called diligent, if dimly lit. And there's even an illustration of your portico, wildly inaccurate, featuring ivy, griffins, and a fountain you definitely don't have. But the point is there, the scrolls, the waiting, the near-spiritual exhaustion, the persistence, and at the end, the soft wood and shade and quiet. You leave the book on the bench. People flip through it when they visit. Some nod, some frown. One boy asks why your curtain is drawn differently than the picture. You shrug. Artistic license. The book brings more visitors. Some want advice, some want stories, some just want to see it. It's strange watching your once imagined portico become a kind of pilgrimage site. A small one, yes, a sleepy one, but real. A woman from Thessaloniki sits beneath it one afternoon, rests her travel sack by the post and murmurs, "It smells like cedar and stubbornness." You take that as the highest compliment. You meet an old stonemason who tells you your corner post is ever so slightly canted. You nod politely, then you offer him almonds. He accepts. Not long after, a delegation arrives from the Department of Micro-Recognition and Commemorative Enumeration. They're quiet, polite. They ask if you'd consider a bronze plaque, no bigger than your hand, just a line or two. Dorotheos's portico, legally approved, lovingly built. You almost say no, almost. But then you remember Petros, The boy who built his uncle's bread stall. You remember Thalia and her scrolls. The scribe who cried reading your permit timeline. The woman who said your roof made her feel like waiting was worth it. You say, yes. They return a week later. The plaque is simple, modest. It sits just above the bench, nestled beneath the awning beam. Visitors often miss it unless they're seated and looking for crumbs. You add a sprig of rosemary beside it, for luck, for remembrance. Historians still argue whether this was the first instance of small-scale civic acknowledgement in the capital's outer wards. Some claim it marked a shift in public perception of local structures. Others dismiss it as a very long accident involving tea and paperwork. You don't argue either way, you just keep sitting. The curtain rustles gently in the breeze. The bench creaks, soft and familiar. And beneath your modest roof, shade gathers like memory. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer applying. You are no longer hoping to be approved. You are living after. And that in this city is rarer than any seal. Summer deepens like honey poured slow. The days stretch thick and amber, and the light under your portico takes on a syrupy glow. You start to notice the rhythm of footsteps on the cobblestones, faster in the morning, slower in the afternoon, almost reverent at twilight. Your bench, once bare, now holds signs of gentle wear, a worn patch where people lean with their elbows, a faint groove where satchels rest. The curtain, too, tells its story, faded just slightly on one edge, as if the sun kisses it more affectionately than the other. One day, a passing priest stops to admire the beamwork. "Solid joinery," he murmurs, running a hand along the cedar. "May it outlast the next 7 patriarchs." You say, "Amen," and mean it. It's around this time that you begin receiving letters from other cities. Chalkida, Nicaea. One from Trebizond, written entirely in verse. Each scroll comes from someone who's heard the story of the portico, the permit, the persistence, and wants to know if it's true. You reply to every single one. Yes, it took 4 years. Yes, they really argued about the curtain. No, the cat was never officially listed as an obstruction. Yes, you'd do it again. You're asked to speak at a small symposium on civic patience and minor architecture. You politely decline. The idea of leaving your bench makes your spine twitch. Instead, you offer to host a discussion under the portico, and they accept. So one fine morning, 7 people in various shades of scholarly disarray arrive. They carry notebooks, wax slates, folding stools, and more questions than any one portico should have to answer. You serve them sweetbread and wine. You tell the story, from the very first scroll to the final approval. You spare no absurdity. You don't soften the delays. But you do emphasize the quiet triumph, that moment when the last tile was set and the sun slid under the awning for the first time like it had been waiting too. One of them, a woman with ink on her sleeve and a voice like distant bells, asks, "What would you say to someone who's about to start?" You look around. At the curve of the wood, the lazy flap of the curtain, the cat asleep with one paw covering her face. Then you say, "Start?" Then keep starting. Every time they tell you to stop, they write that down. Later that week, your bench becomes a sort of notice board, small scrolls tucked beneath the goat hook, messages from clerks, notes from other builders, tiny sketches of awnings, each with a question mark. You keep a basket of blank parchment nearby, a feather quill, a jar of ink, an invitation. More people write. One scroll says simply, "Thank you for making the waiting feel like a path instead of a wall." You don't reply to that one. You just read it twice, then tuck it into the folds of your tunic and carry it home like a soft stone. Historians still argue whether Dorotheos ever truly meant to become a civic figure, or whether he was just a man who refused to move out of the way of his own shadow. The truth is, probably both, because the portico has changed you. It has taught you how to sit still in a moving world, how to stand without shouting, how to build without rushing. How to outlast paperwork not with fire, but with patience. And most importantly, it has taught you that there is honor in small things done well. That evening, as the sky purples and the moon floats just above the old grain warehouse, a young woman stops in front of the bench. She doesn't say anything at first. Then she asks, "Is this the place where people come when they want to try?" You nod. She sits, and the city exhales once more. Autumn arrives not with trumpets or ceremony, but in the quiet shift of light, the way morning slants differently across your curtain, the cooler hush of the stone beneath your sandals, the new crispness in the shadows under your awning. You begin wearing your thicker tunic. Your cat grows fluffier by the day, puffed like a noble of fur who sleeps exclusively on warm wooden planks. And the visitors keep coming, not in waves, just in ones and twos. A steady rhythm of sandals and scrolls, hesitant questions and hopeful sketches. Some stay for only a few minutes. Others return, bringing revisions, updates, or a fresh loaf of olive bread to thank you for advice you barely remember giving. It becomes clear, around the end of the first full leaf fall, that your portico is no longer yours alone. It is part of the street now, a limb of the neighborhood, an unofficial embassy of the possible. One morning, 2 guards stop beneath it to escape a sudden rain. They sit on opposite ends of the bench, still in uniform, one eating an apple, the other adjusting his belt straps. They speak in low voices about their mothers. Neither mentions laws, neither says anything about your structure. And when the rain stops, they leave in silence, nodding their thanks. You find their apple core in a corner and toss it gently into the alley. The cat sniffs where it was, then resumes her nap. Then the unexpected, an invitation to join the Civic Advisory Committee on Minor Infrastructure Advocacy. You receive it on a cloudy Tuesday, rolled tightly and delivered by a clerk wearing mismatched sandals and the look of a man halfway through a dozen errands. You open the scroll. It's unusually polite. They want your opinion. Yes, yours, Dorotheos, merchant, portico veteran, survivor of the ribbon incident. They want to know what makes a permit process work. You almost laugh, then you don't, you think. And you write them back. You tell them what no form ever says. You write, start by assuming the person applying is not trying to cheat you. Then ask what they need, not what they might do wrong. Stamp fewer scrolls with suspicion. Stamp more with hope. You seal it with wax from a candle you've used since the portico's first post was raised, and you send it off with a pigeon you've started calling Philaritos, even though he rarely listens. A month passes. Then comes the reply. Your message has been read aloud at a council meeting. 2 clerks cried. One asked for a transfer to your district, and they've drafted a new template based loosely on your original form, titled simply Form 11A, Application for Modest Shelter, with intent toward community use. It's only being piloted in 3 wards for now. Yours is the first. You sit beneath your portico, staring at the little notice tacked onto the post. Form 11A approved for use. Inquire within. People do. They arrive with hesitant hands and hopeful voices. They ask, is this the right place? You nod. Always, now, you nod. Some bring forms they barely understand. Others bring scraps of wood, little models made from dried wax, bits of twine that suggest awnings or benches or dreams. You help them all. And slowly, your street changes. A bread stall appears 2 doors down, small, rounded, cheerful. A modest water jug stand springs up near the alley corner, built by an old widow who said, I've watched you help people for years, now it's my turn. And across from you, under a vine-covered balcony, a young woman hangs her own curtain. Blue. With a tiny stitched goat at the bottom edge. You raise your cup to her. She raises hers back. No scrolls today, no debates. Just the sound of the city settling into the spaces people have carved for themselves with patience and cedar, quills and courage. Historians still argue whether Form 11A ever achieved empire-wide adoption. Some say it was phased out after too many applicants requested structures to improve neighborhood snack potential. Others claim it evolved into the foundation of modern public use permitting. But here, under your portico, that argument doesn't matter. What matters is the shadow beneath your beam, still stretching gently across the stone. The people sitting there, the quiet between footsteps, the promise still being kept. The first frost brushes the edge of your awning like a shy apology. You notice it in the early hours when the air carries that dry crispness that makes your breath briefly visible, and the cat refuses to leave her blanket. The rosemary in the pots shrivels slightly at the tips, but holds firm, stubborn like the bench. You sweep the stone each morning with a little more ceremony now. Not because it's necessary, but because it feels like a small thank you, as though each sweep is a quiet vow. You still stand, so I still care. One morning, you're sipping warm barley tea when a man in official robes approaches, not the deep, velvet-lined kind, the practical robes of someone who still sharpens their own quill. He stands under your portico, pulls out a scroll and says, "Dorotheos, I'm from the Registry of Lived Permits." You blink. That's a real office? He nods, though his expression says, "We're not sure either." He explains that the registry has begun compiling long-term permit outcomes, cases where an approved structure not only functioned as intended, but somehow made the empire a little more livable. "We'd like to study your portico," he says, "as a case of enduring civic utility." You offer him a bench. He declines, too formal. But he does crouch near the beam and run his fingers along a hairline crack in the wood. "Still sturdy?" he says. Then he smiles. "Unusual." He asks if the cat is considered part of the structure. You say yes. She opens one eye and agrees. He leaves behind a wax tablet with a short form on it. Observation period acknowledgement for public-private urban units. You file it. By now, filing has become second nature. You keep a little chest under the bench filled with parchment, wax, and your original stylus, which you've sharpened down to a nub. You call it the Box of Quiet Victories. Inside are records of everything that's happened since the approval. Repairs, gatherings, frost dates, that one week you had a leaky corner due to overzealous pigeons. It's all there. Not because anyone asked, because you believe it should be. Historians still debate whether Byzantine permit holders were obligated to track the lifespan of their constructions, or if this habit arose from cultural superstition. There is a popular theory that a structure unrecorded would eventually unexist. You don't believe that, but you record anyway. A week later, the frost deepens. People sit less, linger less. They shuffle in, tuck under the awning for a moment, blow into their hands and continue on. Still you keep the bench clear. You keep the curtain drawn low against the wind. You even add a second pot, thyme this time, for warmth, for scent, for the cat to hide behind. Then, one night, as you're lighting a lamp, a man stumbles in from the street. He looks rough, cloak torn, sandals frayed. You don't know him. He doesn't speak at first, just sits, breathes, warms his hands near your lamp. You don't ask questions. You bring him a cup of broth. He drinks it slowly. Then he says, "I waited for years just to build a little lean-to." You nod. He stares at the beam. "They kept moving my scroll, said I didn't phrase it properly." You nod again. You've heard this story in 100 variations, each one with its own flavor of despair. Then he says something that stills the evening. "I thought it was me. That maybe I just wasn't the sort of person buildings happened for." The cat hops up next to him. He pets her once. She doesn't object. Then he adds, "But I heard about this place. I had to see it, just to know it wasn't a myth." You say softly, "It wasn't easy." He smiles. "That's why it matters." You sit together in silence. And in that silence, something settles. Not just the cold, not just the season, but something else. An understanding, a communion built from benches and scrolls and breath that fogs the air in tiny shared spirals. Eventually he leaves, not with a scroll, not with a permit, but with posture straighter, shoulders lighter, as though he's remembered he exists, and that's the first step. You watch him vanish down the street into the mist. Then you lean back, look up, and for the first time you realize your portico isn't just a building, it's an invitation. The new year arrives not with fireworks or fanfare, but with a silence that blankets the city like fine dust. The market square is quieter. The pigeons, oddly organized, sit like miniature gargoyles on the edges of nearby awnings, as if conducting a silent audit of rooftops. Even the wind has grown thoughtful, tugging gently at your curtain, as if requesting permission rather than barreling through. And beneath your portico, life continues, slower but steady. You begin to notice returners, faces that sat here in spring, now back in winter with scarves and scrolls and new kinds of questions. A potter named Timo, who once asked how to register a shade for his kiln, now wants to build a platform for storytelling. A young woman named Doria, who once nibbled barley bread on your bench while crying over an invalidated permit, now returns with her own success. A little stall in Ward 7, approved, built, thriving. They come not for help now, but for ritual. To sit, to share, to remember what persistence looks like in cedar and clay. And then, one bright morning, something odd happens. A man arrives, holding your original scroll. The scroll. The one you submitted years ago, rolled tightly, sealed, and sent spiraling into the maze of bureaucracy. You blink, he hands it to you gently as though offering a relic. Found in the bottom of a transfer chest in the South Archive, he says. Apparently it was filed twice, once by you, once by a clerk who forgot he already did it. You unroll it with fingers slightly trembling. It's still intact, the ink faded but legible. The diagrams, your awkward little columns, your hopeful sketch of the curtain still visible. There, in the bottom margin, a note you'd forgotten you added, "May it one day be real." You laugh, softly, quietly, because it is real. The scroll never made it to the Approval Council. It was already handled by a duplicate. A clerical accident, they tell you. Historians still argue whether this case marked a rare exception or revealed a deeper truth, that the Byzantine system, by sheer bulk and repetition, sometimes approved things twice and only noticed once one version got built. You place the scroll in your box of quiet victories, nestled between the maintenance log and the biscuit wrapper from the night Thalia visited. You consider mounting it above the bench, but decide against it. Let it rest now. That afternoon, a boy stops by with a question about wind coverage laws. He's trying to build a foldable booth for selling poems. You offer tea. The cat approves. He doesn't yet know how long it might take, but he knows it can be done. And that's enough. You receive more letters. One from a retired clerk named Stephanos, yes, that's Stephanos, who says, "I still remember the tapping. The committee never did understand my system, but your structure. It made me feel like the tapping wasn't wasted." You keep that one under your cushion. Winter deepens. You reinforce the bench with a new brace. Patch a bit of curtain. Add a candle holder to the post so visitors can warm their fingers. The structure hums with use. A couple meets here every Tuesday just to talk and share a fig. A visiting monk composes prayers beneath the awning because, as he says, it's the only place where nobody interrupts. The portico no longer belongs to you alone. It belongs to the act of waiting, the breath between scrolls, the quiet proof that persistence can be carved into wood. And then one evening, as the snow begins to fall, you find a scroll wedged behind the bench. No ribbon, no seal, just one sentence. "I saw yours. I'm going to try." You hold it in your hands for a long time, longer than a clerk would have allowed. And as the night settles around you like parchment laid flat for writing, you lean back under the roof you once imagined, and now live beneath. And you whisper, "Yes, try." Spring, when it returns, does not rush. It slips in slowly like a cat returning to a room it once claimed. One warm afternoon here, a bud on the rosemary there. The sound of children's voices returning to the alley, not urgent, but exploratory, like they're testing the air to see if the season has truly changed. Under your portico, everything breathes a little easier. You take down the waxed cloth you hung over the bench during the frost season. You dust the curtain. You trim the time back so it doesn't sprawl into the cat's nap space. A small ritual as sacred to you now as the earliest candle lighting of a monastery morning. And then you receive a visitor with a very old face. He walks slowly, leaning on a carved cane shaped like a twisted fish. His beard is white and wild, his sandals mismatched, and his eyes the kind of clear that only comes after 70 years of watching plans unravel and reform into different shapes. He does not sit right away. He stands in the doorway of your portico as though crossing a threshold into something half-remembered. "This is it," he says. You nod. He steps forward. "I submitted a permit once," he says, finally taking the bench with a long, creaky sigh. "A simple one. Just wanted to build a shelf outside my bakery, a place for the bread to cool in the breeze." You say nothing, let the silence carry him forward. "They lost it," he says. "Or said they did. Then they told me I needed a different form. Then they said it was too close to a fountain. Then a new scribe took over and started the process again." He gazes at the beam above his head. "I never built it." You nod again. This time slower. He pats the bench. "But this," he says, "this is what I thought mine would be. A thing that didn't ask much, that made things easier, that stayed." You sit with him until the shadows stretch like arms across the stone, and when he leaves a small loaf on the bench, wrapped in cloth, still warm. You share it with a passing clerk, young, hopeful, deeply confused about the difference between a light-use structure and a multi-shade shelter. You give him half the loaf and the story of the old man. Later that week, you receive a scroll marked in green ink. That's new. It's a note from the Office of Function Continuity and Urban Peace, a department that, as far as you know, has no building, no staff, and no clear purpose. Still, the scroll reads, "Structures such as yours are to be grandfathered into the new Civic Presence Preservation Initiative. No additional forms are needed at this time." You laugh out loud. Your neighbour calls across the way. "Good news?" "The best kind," you reply. "Paperwork I don't have to do." She lifts a jug in your direction, toasts you with fig wine. It feels like a victory parade conducted at Nap volume. That night, 3 people sit beneath your awning to share a story. They've come from the north by boat, then by mule. They carry scrolls in protective cloth wraps and questions about chimney permissions and wallflower signage. You feed them lentils and lemon slices. You show them how to fold their requests so they fit into the transfer chests without getting caught on the rim. You explain that if a clerk stamps something upside down, it's not a rejection, just an invitation to ask politely for clarification. They sleep nearby. The cat curls up beside the one who snores the softest. By morning, their scrolls are cleaner, tighter, more likely to survive scrutiny. And before they leave, they write on the wall of your portico, tiny, faint, with ink so pale it's nearly invisible. This is where it began. You consider painting over it. Then you don't. Spring deepens, the rosemary blooms again. Children sit beneath your bench to play their nonsense string game. An elderly woman uses the shade to knit socks for a friend who runs a bathhouse. A priest blesses the beam and mutters something about miracles in slow motion. And you sit, as always, sipping tea that tastes faintly of history and time. This portico, this rectangle of cedar and patience, has outlived expectation. It is no longer a structure, it is a rhythm. The day the scholars arrive, you nearly mistake them for tourists. There are 5 of them, robes too clean, sandals too unused, one of them carrying an oversized map of the city's ancient water channels for no apparent reason. They gather under your portico as if trying to agree on where they already are. You watch from your shop doorway, wiping your hands on a cloth that has long since retired from active cleaning. Eventually, one of them steps forward. The eldest, you think. Grey streaks in his beard, eyes that twitch at every new sound. "We're from the university annex," he says, as though this means something more than the syllables themselves. You nod. "Wait. We're writing a volume on persistent structures in living cities," he continues, "and your portico has been shortlisted." You arch one brow. Another of the scholars, nervous, scribbling, chimes in, "It's one of the few civilian constructions that has remained functionally unchanged since its permit approval." You nearly laugh. Functionally unchanged? It rained through the corner twice. The bench has been rebuilt 3 times, and the curtain, now on its 5th version, has seen more colours than a mosaic in the imperial baths. Still, you say nothing. You just gesture toward the bench. They sit, cautiously, as if afraid sitting too fast might trigger a legal review. Then begins the interview. What was your initial intention? What do you believe the structure represents? Did you expect it to become iconic? You answer with slow words, like placing one tile at a time on a very long roof. You tell them it was about shade and waiting and the small courage of asking for something you might never receive. You mention the time the seal broke, the time the scroll smudged, the time you waited 14 days because a goose chased the courier into a well. They take notes. One of them asks about the goat hook. You don't explain it. You just let it be. They leave after an hour, folding their questions into little waxed packets like leftovers from a banquet they're not sure how to serve. As they go, one pauses, turns back and says, "There's something about this place." You nod. "It's the wood, or the cat." He smiles, unsure whether you're joking. You're not. The cat has an undeniable presence. A few days later, a new scroll arrives, a draft copy of the university's entry on your portico. You read it aloud to the cat. Dorotheos's portico, an emblem of lawful endurance and the subtle resistance of slowness. Constructed after 4 years of administrative navigation, the structure now serves as a nexus of community patience and informal mentorship. A quiet protest in the form of wood and shade. You set it down. You laugh. Because you never meant for it to be a protest. You just wanted people not to get rained on. Later that afternoon, a child stops by with a question. She's carrying a miniature replica of your portico made from scrap wood and dried fig stems. Her older brother is trying to help her get permission to build it in their courtyard. "Do I need a stamp?" she asks, holding up a scroll the size of your hand. You nod. "But only one," you say, "and try not to let the ink run." She beams. The bench creaks as she hops up beside you. You teach her how to hold the quill, slowly, carefully, like it matters. Because it does. She leaves the model behind when she goes, says it's too small for her now. You place it on the shelf beside the tea jars. It sits there like a memory carved in miniature, your own portico, smaller, fragile, and perfect. Historians still argue whether this moment, the child, the model, the scroll, too small to need folding, marked a shift in how structures were imagined in the capital's heart. But you don't care about their arguments. You care that the sun is coming in at just the right angle. You care that someone just sat down with a question and a warm bun. You care that the structure still stands, still shelters, still waits. You're sipping rosehip tea one evening, soft music drifting from somewhere deep in the alley, when you hear a sound you haven't heard in years. The soft tap-tap-tap of a stylus on wood. Rhythmic, familiar, maddening, in a strangely comforting way. You freeze, listening. Then, just as it begins to fade, a figure steps into the frame of your portico. Stephanos. Yes, that's Stephanos. Of the table tapping, of the endless committee meetings, of the long sighs and longer pauses that once decided the fate of your awning's curvature. He is older now, of course. Thinner. The kind of thinness that makes you think of wind wearing down marble. But his eyes are the same, sharp, restless, the kind that look at a bench and wonder what footnote it belongs in. He doesn't speak right away, just runs his fingers along the edge of the bench and nods to himself. "Still standing?" he says eventually. You nod. "Stubborn wood," he smiles. "Not much, but enough." "I saw your structure listed in the new training manual," he says. Page 12, Section B. Exemplary patience in civil execution. They're calling it the Dorotheos method. You snort. "Sounds like a cult." "Not yet," he says, sitting beside you. "But give it time." You sit together in the fading light, just two men surrounded by the smells of time and old ink and distant bread. The cat hops up, inspects Stephanos' robe, then decides to sit exactly between you, neutral ground. Stephanos looks up at the beam. You know, I tried to block it, at one point, not out of spite, just policy inertia. I figured, you say? He nods. But something in your scroll kept pulling me back. It wasn't perfect, the syntax wandered, the margins were inconsistent. But, you ask? But it wanted to exist, he says. It had weight, like it already had a shadow waiting for it. You're quiet for a while after that. Then he reaches into his bag and pulls out a small wooden box. Inside, a stamp, round, worn smooth at the handle. The seal is faint now, but still legible. He sets it on the bench between you. Yours? He says. You blink. What for? I don't know. I just think it belongs here now. You pick it up. You remember that shape. You remember watching it stamp someone else's scroll. You remember longing, aching, questioning if it would ever touch yours. And now it's here. No parchment. No application. Just here. Stephanos stands. They'll make another. They always do. Before he leaves, he turns back and says, Your portico changed how some of us see the process. You nod. After he's gone, you turn the stamp over in your hands. It's heavy in that comforting way, like something you've carried so long it's become part of your fingers. You don't use it. You place it gently on the shelf next to the miniature model, beside a pebble, a worn ribbon, and a button you once found tucked into your curtain's seam. Souvenirs of the slow fight. Historians still argue whether Stephanos' visit marked a moment of personal redemption or merely a nostalgic tour of bureaucratic hauntings. Theories abound. Some say he retired that month. Others insist he went on to approve 25 minor structures in a single week, citing mood. You prefer to think he simply needed to see it, to feel the shade, to hear the quiet creak of a beam that once lived in a scroll. That night, as the city cools and the streets empty, you sit beneath the awning and listen to the soft scratch of the cat grooming herself, the distant clatter of dishes, and the rhythmic hush of wind brushing past wood. You close your eyes, and in that moment the past feels folded, not gone, not lost, but stored inside the grain of the bench, the bend of the curtain rod, the small round weight of the stamp on your shelf. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just the steady, silent presence of a thing once impossible, now real, now yours. You're adding a fresh coat of oil to the bench, olive, lightly scented with orange peel, because why not? When a courier arrives with a scroll tied in navy ribbon. Navy means Imperial Advisory Notice, but not the dramatic kind, not prepare your grain stores or mandatory beard measurements level, more like, please don't ignore this just because it sounds optional. You untie it. The wax cracks politely. Inside, a short message. The Imperial Office of Decorative Simplicity cordially invites you to consult on future standards for minor structures in high-traffic, high-patience zones. You blink. High-patience zones? Apparently that's what they're calling areas where residents have collectively endured more than 3 permit cycles per structure. You are somehow a pioneer of this designation. The invitation is formal but respectful, no threats of fines. Of no overuse of capital letters. Just an honest ask. Would you share what you've learned? You look around. At your portico, steady, quiet, blessedly dull in the best way. At your shelf, now holding 5 mini scrolls, the small wooden stamp, and a dried fig given to you by a child who said, "This roof makes the wind less scary." You nod, though no one is watching. So you go. Not far, just a hall near the aqueduct, where advisory councils meet in the colder months to avoid dripping roofs and overly ambitious doves. You bring notes, not because you need them, but because they expect them. The room is full of soft coughs and careful pens. When it's your turn to speak, you stand, not tall, not loud, just firmly. You say, I built a portico. It took 4 years, not because it was difficult, but because the process didn't believe in itself. Someone starts to object. You continue. What I learned is that most people don't need things quickly. They just need to know the slowness means something, that there's a path, a pattern, a shadow they can follow, even if they never see the roof at the end. You don't say much else, just enough. When you finish, no one claps at this isn't that kind of room, but no one argues either. Later, a clerk sidles up to you with a scroll under his arm. I'm trying to build a bench in my courtyard. I haven't even started the application. You smile. Then you're already further than most? He exhales like you've handed him something weightless and rare. Back home, your portico seems warmer somehow. Or maybe it's just your bones getting older, growing into the wood grain of the bench you've tended longer than some emperors held the throne. A boy skips past, stops. You're the bench man, he says. You nod. Among other things, he grins. My mother said you once built the shade that helped her write a poem. You pause. That sounds vaguely possible. She still reads it, he says. It's about time and roofs and not giving up. He waves and runs off. You stare after him for a long while, your fingers absently smoothing the same knot in the wood you've touched 1,000 times. That evening, a girl leaves a folded drawing under the cat's cushion. It shows your portico rough with too many beams and stars in the sky. You pin it to your shelf with a waxed fig stem. Next to the plaque, next to the pebble, next to the memory. And outside, the city keeps going, slow, stubborn, shade by shade. You wake to the sound of hammering, not your own, not from your street. Distant, echoing, familiar in a way that makes your bones sit up before you do. You shuffle to the edge of the portico, pulling your shawl around your shoulders. It's barely dawn. The city is just stretching, and yet somewhere beyond the alley, someone is already building. Not rushing, not stomping, just beginning. You smile. Later that day, a young couple stops by. They look tired in the eyes, but bright everywhere else, like they've been explaining their dream too many times, but haven't lost it yet. They sit, offer you sesame biscuits wrapped in cloth. You accept because you're not a monster. They want to build a canopy for a reading nook. Under a fig tree. You'd think that wouldn't need approval, the woman says. You nod. You'd think a lot of things. They laugh, a little louder than necessary, and you let them. You ask the usual questions. Is it attached to an existing structure? Is it visible from the street? Is it likely to offend a passing bishop? They pause at the last one. You'd be surprised, you say. They leave with a revised form, 2 examples, and your favourite phrase. Just enough detail to avoid questions, but not so much they have to read it twice. Later you find yourself watching shadows. Your portico's shade falls a little differently now, broader maybe, or perhaps the city has shifted around it so slowly you didn't notice until now. The rosemary is blooming again. The thyme has climbed its pot, reaching for the curtain tie. You trim it back gently. The cat, older now, prefers the top of the bench to the cushion. Less fuss, better view. A clerk stops by unannounced. You don't recognize him at first, but his voice is familiar, calm, slightly nasal, the sound of someone who has spent decades pronouncing provisional as though it were a holy word. He carries no scroll, just a loaf of bread. He sits, breaks it in half, says, "I retired." You nod. "Congratulations?" He shrugs. "No more scrolls to stamp, just mornings like this." You both chew for a while, listening to the creak of the bench and the hum of the city waking up. He glances at the shelf. "You still keep the stamp?" "Of course," you say. "Never know when the wind will demand a new form." He chuckles. Before he leaves, he places a folded cloth on the bench. Inside is a note, written in the same neat hand you remember from your earliest rejections. You made the process seem human again. That's more than any of us managed. You don't cry. You just press the cloth flat and place it between the biscuit wrapper and the first child's drawing. That night, a light rain falls. You remain seated under your roof, warm, dry, listening to the soft patter of droplets on tile, the gentle rise and fall of city breath, the sigh of water meeting stone. And you whisper, not for anyone to hear, just for the roof and the bench and the ghosts of scrolls long since faded. Still here. The wind replies, not loud, but enough. The city begins whispering of change, not loudly, not with parades or proclamations, but in the way carts begin to carry different kinds of wood, in the way people linger longer at corners, pointing at rooftops, drawing things in the air with their fingers. You hear it first from a baker. They say there's a new form for things that don't quite fit. You raise an eyebrow. Not walls, not stalls, not entirely decorative, but useful. You nod slowly. Sounds like a trap. She grins. Sounds like your portico. Later, a young man with hair like a goat's mane stops by. He's got 2 scrolls, one half filled, one still warm from the scribe's press. He doesn't sit, just paces in the shade. They keep telling me my plan needs to declare its philosophical alignment. You blink. Are you building a shrine? No, he says. It's a bench with a sloped roof. You gesture to your own. He stares at it like a revelation. But yours is approved. Barely. He sits. Sighs, you help him reword the phrase to rest one's thoughts into to enable brief, sedentary rebalancing under moderate canopy influence. He nearly cries from gratitude. Later, when he leaves, he bows to the curtain. The curtain is unimpressed. You hear from others too, new forms with strange requirements, requests for sketches that include emotional intention, permits that ask for a public mood estimate. You watch it all with the slow blink of a man who has outwaited 4 winters of wax shortages and once saw a clerk mistake a wine stain for a seal of approval. Still you remain at your bench. The city churns, the scrolls get stranger, the pigeons stay the same. One afternoon, a girl of perhaps 12 sits beside you and asks, "Did you invent waiting?" You laugh so hard your tea spills. "No," you say, "but I got very good at it." She squints at your beam. "Is it magic?" "No, bureaucracy." "Oh," she says, disappointed then. "That's worse." You nod. Much. But later you find she's drawn something on a scrap of parchment and tucked it under the goat hook, a picture of your portico with little stars around it. Underneath, she's written, "Magic enough." You add it to your shelf. By now, the shelf is more shrine than storage. It holds fragments of years, dried rosemary, 3 broken quills, a bead from someone's cloak, a coin that's not real currency, but was pressed into your hand with such ceremony you couldn't refuse. One day, a group of strangers arrives. They're from far beyond the city, wearing strange tunics, accents wrapped in wind. They don't ask questions, they just sit, rest, breathe. Eventually one says, "We heard about the man who waited, thought it was a story." You shrug. "It still is." They smile. Leave a pebble on your bench. Smooth, flat. Polished on one side, you keep it. It rains the next day, not hard, just enough. And you stay seated. A man walks by, soaked, pauses in front of your awning, then mutters, "Smart." You smile. "Approved too." He stares. "You filed for this?" 4 years. He whistles low. "Worth it?" You look around, at the beam, at the bench, at the shelf, the curtain, the cat, at the people, still drifting in and out like tides, brushing the edge of something permanent. You say, "More than I expected." And that evening, you light your lantern early, not because it's dark, but because there are more people coming now, and everyone waits better when there's light. You begin to lose track of how many people have sat beneath your portico. Not because you don't pay attention, you do, but because the stories now outnumber the beams. They collect like dust in the corners, in the folds of the curtain, in the places where fingers rest when words run out. One morning, You find a loaf of bread wrapped in a note that simply says, "For sheltering my father when he didn't know how to keep standing." You don't know who left it. You don't ask. The bread is warm. You slice it, share it with the cat, and save the note. By now, you have an entire box of them. Notes, drawings, folded corners, anonymous thank yous that smell like lemon peel and ink. You consider organizing them, maybe a little ledger. Then you remember what happens when ledgers get too tidy. Better to leave them layered, like sediment. Let time do the filing. One evening, a man in an official-looking robe stands under your awning, arms crossed. He says nothing for a long while, just watches the sunset scrape gold across the roof. Then he says, "I was on the committee that almost denied your scroll." You wait. He continues, "We didn't understand what you were trying to build." You smile. "Neither did I. Not at first." He looks at you. "It's more than a roof." You nod. "It became that." He says, "We're thinking of starting a new designation. Persistent civic anchors, structures that stabilize neighborhoods without central planning. Your portico would be the first." You stir your tea, ask, "Would that require another scroll?" He hesitates. "Possibly 3. You both laugh, and then he asks if he can sit. You gesture to the bench. He lowers himself slowly. Not old, just cautious. The kind of caution that comes from years of holding power and never knowing where to place it safely. You say, "The bench creaks." He replies, "So do I." You sit in silence for a while. A child runs past, chasing a hoop. A vendor calls out about fennel roots. The city moves, unbothered. Finally, he says, "We thought you were just stubborn." "I was," you say. "Still are?" You smile. "Only for useful things." He taps his fingers on the bench, the rhythm slow, thoughtful. Not the old bureaucratic tapping. This one has weight. Pause, memory. Before he leaves, he asks if he can come back. Not officially, just to sit. "Any time," you say. That night, the curtain dances in a breeze that smells like blooming citrus and wood smoke. You light your lantern later than usual. There's no need to draw attention anymore. Everyone who needs to find it does. Someone leaves a half-finished scroll beneath the bench. No name, no title. Just a sentence. "If they say no, I'll still build it." In my mind first, like he did. You trace the words with your finger. Then tuck the scroll onto the shelf beside the others. That's the secret, you think. It wasn't the stamp, or the seal, or the syntax. It was the waiting. The choosing to wait. And in that waiting, carving out a place the city didn't know it needed until it had already begun to lean on it. You sip your tea. The bench creaks. And someone else sits down. A festival arrives unannounced, as festivals often do in this part of the city. Not with a proclamation, but with ribbons on balconies, the smell of honey fritters in the air, and children running down the street with painted faces yelling things that may or may not be actual words. You watch it all from your bench. The portico, too, gets swept up in it. Someone, probably the bakery girl, hangs a garland of dried orange peel and olive branches across your beam. The curtain acquires 3 tiny bells, which jingle only when the wind is in a very specific mood. And for one afternoon, the shade beneath your roof becomes something else entirely. Not just rest, not just patience, but celebration. A family lays down a blanket and shares pomegranate seeds while their grandfather hums an off-key song about goats and destiny. 2 scribes rehearse a play they're writing about a time-traveling tax collector. A small boy sells imaginary permits to imaginary buildings, insisting that yours is the original model. You ask model. You buy a permit from him for 2 stones and half a walnut. It's a good deal. Someone brings a lyre, someone else brings pickled cabbage. Even the cat participates by sitting precisely in the center of everything, exuding judgment and majesty in equal measure. And for a few hours, the slow breath of your portico becomes laughter, music, crumbs, and joy. The city seems to lean in as if to say, This is what we forgot we wanted. Historians still argue whether these festivals were ever formally sanctioned or simply spontaneous urban eruptions, moments when bureaucracy stepped aside and the people reminded each other that joy is its own kind of infrastructure. You believe it's both. That evening, as the last of the festival candles flicker out and the street returns to its usual murmur, someone taps your shoulder. It's the young clerk from years ago, the one who asked whether his scroll needed emotional balance. He's taller now, confident now, holds himself like someone who knows where the forms are kept and isn't afraid of asking the archivist twice. I got promoted, he says. They asked me what shaped my view of public service. You raise an eyebrow. I said a bench under a stubborn roof that smelled like rosemary and tea. You chuckle. That'll look good in a footnote. He hands you a scroll. Unsealed, informal. Inside, a map of the city dotted with little ink stars. Proposed quiet zones, he says. Places where people can wait, think, breathe. You scan it. One star is right where you sit. You're the first, he says. The proof of concept. You nod. The curtain sways, the bench creaks, and a breeze carries the faint sound of leftover music from somewhere far down the alley. The next morning, you hang the scroll on your wall, not just because of what it means, but because it reminds you of what it started with: one man, one scroll, and a desire for a little shade in a world that didn't know how to pause. And now? Now the city pauses here with you, one person at a time. Time, by now, has softened the corners of everything. The bench, smooth where 100 people have rested their palms. The beam, darkened gently with sun and smoke and the oils of fingers pointing up at its simple, stubborn construction. Even your teacup, chipped long ago on the rim, now feels like part of the architecture. The cat, too, has aged. She no longer leaps. She climbs deliberately, curls more tightly in her sleep, and accepts petting with the grave tolerance of a retired official. You've started calling her Inspector, which feels both ironic and deserved. One afternoon, a girl with ink-stained fingers and a determined gait stops in front of your portico. I'm building something, she says. You nod. The world is full of builders now. But not a stall, she clarifies. Not a shade, not even a bench. You wait. It's a place where people write letters to things that don't exist yet. You blink. A shrine? No, she says. A porch for ideas, a space to admit that you're not there yet, but want to be. You take a sip of tea. That sounds like a portico. She grins. Yours helped me name it. You hand her a scroll, unused, fine parchment, a little faded at the edges. She bows. What do I write first? You say. Start with what's missing, then give it a roof. She leaves, humming a tune that might be made up. You think of her often after that, wondering how you would have described your own beginning if someone had asked in those terms. Probably the same, a roof for an ache. A few days later, a delegation from another city stops by. They say they've been reviewing your case as part of a broader study on low-friction civic legacy artifacts. You try not to laugh at the phrase. They're sincere, earnest. They ask permission to document your portico for training purposes. Document away, you say. Just don't fix anything. They measure, photograph, sketch. One of them tries to interview the cat. The cat blinks slowly, then turns around and faces the wall. You tell the story again. Not because you need to, but because they ask. And you've learned over the years that asking is the holiest part of the process. They leave with notes and fig bread. And before they go, the youngest one says, "It's strange. In a city full of marble and domes, this little corner feels like the most intentional space." You nod, because it is. You begin to notice how others talk about your structure now. Not as the portico, but as Dorotheos's place. At first you resist it. It's not about you, but then you realize it was your name on the scroll, your breath in the lines, your time in the waiting. So maybe it is yours. Not as ownership, but as origin. You finally commission a small plaque, wooden like the rest. Tucked discreetly into the base of the bench, it reads, "Built with permission and persistence." Nothing more. A child reads it aloud one morning and asks, "What's persistence?" You say, "It's when you keep asking nicely, even when no one listens the first time." They think about this, then nod. And for the first time in years, you realize you've become not just a builder, but a steward of the structure, of the story, of a quiet kind of hope that proves you don't have to move fast or loudly to shape the world. You just have to stay. A letter arrives, this time by hand, no wax, just parchment folded with care and tucked under a corner of the bench. You almost miss it. It blends in with the cushion and the faded edge of last year's spring mud. Inside, a short message. "Dear Dorotheos, I've never met you, but I've heard your bench holds more peace than the Senate. I'm tired. May I sit?" There's no signature. But when you return from fetching tea, someone is already there. She's older, wears the kind of robe that's been mended too many times to be modest and not enough to be whole. She's not crying, but her shoulders say she's recently stopped. You say nothing, sit beside her. The cat curls near her feet and yawns like she's done this every day for centuries. After a long silence, the woman says, "They denied my request. I asked for a lean-to beside the bathhouse, just a sliver of shade." You wait. "They said it would interrupt the aesthetic balance of the adjacent columns." You nod. She glances at the beam above you. "Yours doesn't interrupt anything. It absorbs," you say. She chuckles, unexpectedly deep. "Yes, like good bread." You offer her some tea. She accepts. The cup is slightly chipped.
It doesn't matter. By the time she leaves, she's taken nothing except, maybe, a little weight off her chest. You find later that she's left a tiny soapstone turtle beneath the shelf. Its shell is carved with a spiral. You add it to the shrine of things unclaimed but meaningful. That evening, the curtain flutters harder than usual. A windstorm is gathering. You anchor the pots, wrap the shelf in cloth, bring the cat inside for once. She protests, then settles with the theatrical sigh of a being who has suffered greatly. The rain hits at midnight. Not gentle, not poetic, just loud. And your portico holds. The next morning, neighbours come to see if it's still standing. One claps, another whistles. A third offers you olives, which you don't especially like, but accept anyway because the gesture is the point. Then comes the scribe. You've seen him before, at a distance, in the city's central office.
Always surrounded by scrolls, always frowning like the laws offended him personally. He carries a board. He says, "We're rewriting the guide." You raise an eyebrow. "The permit manual. We're adding a section on legacy structures." You nod, slow. "Dangerous territory." He grins, barely. "We're calling it the Dorothean exception." You laugh, a deep one this time. "That sounds illegal." "It is," he says, "but only until we approve it." He leaves you a draft, handwritten, not formal, but real. You read it aloud later to no one in particular. In certain cases, when a structure proves itself by function, community value, and absurdly long wait times, it may be granted permanent status under the Dorothean clause, an allowance for buildings whose existence teaches the city more than their absence would. You lean back on the bench. Let that sink in. The clause isn't about you. It's about what happens when you don't give up. And that, finally, is something you can believe in. That night, a girl leaves a scroll under your curtain tie. No words. Just a drawing. A dozen little awnings in a row. All different, all casting shade, all with cats. You fall asleep with the image in your mind. The empire, not of marble, but of porches, of shelters, of small places that say, "You can wait here." The days stretch longer now. You feel it in the light that lingers on the beam well past supper, in the way shadows stretch across the bench, like they're settling in for a story. Even the cat, once so attuned to the rhythms of dusk, seems unsure when to demand dinner. You sit, as always. The tea is a little sweeter tonight, infused with a candied lemon someone left behind. The bench, newly sanded by a neighbour with too much time and a perfectly good chisel, creaks less. The curtain flutters only slightly as if rocking itself to sleep. Someone arrives quietly. You recognize him from years ago. A boy then, wide-eyed, wrote his scroll upside down, wanted a tiny awning for his mother's garden stool. He sits beside you now, fully grown, confident, tired, in a new way. She passed, he says. You nod. She'd be proud. He places a slip of parchment in your hand. It's a drawing of her stool, now with a little roof. Took me 7 years, approved last month. You smile. You beat my record. He smiles back. She used it twice, said it reminded her of this place. You reach for the tea, pour him some. Pour him, say nothing. There's nothing to say that matters more than sitting. Later, he leaves the scroll behind. You tuck it into the shelf, now overflowing. Some things spill over the edge. You don't mind. The mess is part of the structure now. Historians, still arguing, always, debate whether Dorotheus's portico became the prototype for future urban quiet spaces or simply an anomaly, an accident of civic neglect transformed by stubborn kindness. You don't care. You built what you needed. Others found what they didn't know they'd been looking for. And somehow, across years and stamps and tea stains, it became enough. There's a knock at the post. A little girl, face smudged with jam, holds out a folded note. It's for the bench, she says. You open it. Inside, in crooked letters, thank you for waiting. You stare at it for a long while. You don't cry. You just exhale and let the evening deepen. Now, it's night. A soft night. The kind that doesn't ask for anything. The streets are quiet, save for the occasional hush of sandals on stone or the rustle of a cart's canvas as it's tied down against the breeze. Your portico glows faintly from the lamp tucked near the shelf, casting a warm arc of amber across the wood. The curtain sways slowly, like it remembers the hands that stitched its hem, the fingers that waited too long for a permit to hang it. You lean back. The bench fits you better these days, not because it changed, but because you did. It knows your weight now, your pauses, your size. The cat sleeps deeply beside your foot, one paw twitching in dreams you'll never know. Somewhere nearby, someone hums a tune that may or may not have lyrics. You can almost hear the past settle in, all those forms, those denials, the accidental approvals, the late-night revisions, the tapping on tables, the slowness, mistaken for silence. They all live here now, not as burdens, but as beams, as quiet corners, as the space beneath the roof where strangers become neighbours. You smile. Not the kind that expects anything back. Just the kind that happens when things, at last, have found their shape. And with a final glance at the lamplight pooling on smooth wood, you close your eyes, let the shadows stretch further, let the city soften, let the portico hold you, just like it always has.